Chapter 13. Finding a friend by the light of the silvery moon. As Nick's loved ones discussed the thorough investigation and protection from Jay of Katie, Nick and Katie had already left for the barn. As before, the light of the moon lit the footpath, and Nick grabbed the large square flashlight for extra measure or emergency. Although the barn was near a century old, Gramps had electricity wired throughout, decades before. While Nick saddled up Will Power, Katie leaned her head on the stall door of Wanderer. Nick was humming Brotherly Love, and what verses Katie did know, she sang along softly. It did not take but a few bars for Wanderer to approach Katie and nuzzle her. Katie kissed her on the nose, putting her hand on the other side of her nose, in a sort of hug. That Wanderer surely does love you, Teach. How long have you had her? Katie asked as she leaned her forehead up against Wanderer's forehead. Gramps just got her recently. She's easily spooked, but apparently she knows a loving heart when she gets near one, Nick said, giving Katie his eye of adoration. She smiled at him, then turned and hugged and patted Wanderer's long nose. She's beautiful, aren't you, girl? Nick patted Wanderer's mane. She sure is. Katie leaned into Wanderer's neck and patted the other side of it with her hand in a loving embrace. Chestnut Mary moved out toward the center of the barn, snorting, wanting her share of the attention. Katie moved across, giving her the love she required. Before long, Katie was singing, kissing, and petting all the horses in the barn, learning how not to be so afraid of them. You're a natural, Teach, with these horses. I never thought I would be, for Pete's sake, they are so big and scary to me. One thing about horses is that you can calm them down with some gentle humming and keep them that way by letting them approach you, but on the flip side of that, you must show the animal who has the authority. They sense fear, sort of like you, Princess. She spun around to see Nick snickering. What's that supposed to mean? Nick chuckled, debating whether to tell what Scotty said. Never mind. Katie walked over to Nick, who was leading Will Power out of the barn. No, you never mind nothing, you tell me what you mean, or I won't go with you. Well, then you'll miss out on a spectacular sight, and it won't happen again, for another month, and that's if the sky is as clear as it is now, and we are entering the rainy season. Chances on a clear night are slim. Katie leaned on one leg with her arms folded. He had her. She loved the forgiveness field and imagined if anything it must be absolutely gorgeous. It was obvious to Katie that Nick was learning how to have the upper hand with her, apparently from Scotty's coaching. PC, she asked as she put her foot in the stirrup, and as he helped her up first. What, Princess? Nick asked while mounting Will Power, and holding his reins with his arms around Katie, like earlier. He gently kicked Will Power, and the horse took his rider and his rider's girl to the most spectacular of places. Why are you and Scotty such good friends all of a sudden and teaming up? Obviously, he's been coaching you. You keep using his techniques to boss me around? You two have ganged up on me, and I don't think it's funny or fair. Nick was silent, not knowing what to say. She was picking up on what was happening. He's passing me off to you, isn't he? He's going to dump me, isn't he? He took my car away, or someone did, because you all ain't getting your stories right. Your conspiracy is so obvious. He keeps saying that I'm in love with you, so because he thinks that he's getting me used to the idea. That's why he's pulling away. You must be loving this, don't ya? I don't love anything that makes you sad, Princess. I don't know what to tell you. Well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be simply passed off to another man, like I'm some kind of second-hand trophy doll, and I'm no trophy, anyway. You all act like I can't think for myself or make decisions by myself. I'm an independent woman, you know. I let them boss me around before, and Jay manipulated me, but I'm not going to anymore. Scotty is not just going to throw me to the dogs. She paused. At that second, a 6-foot-thick wall of ice divided them on that saddle, again. The icy air from her insult brought a cold chill to the back of her neck. A black cloud of regret hovered over her and shut out the moon's glow as she sighed out self-condemnation. Oh, crap, I didn't mean it that way. That came out really bad, PC, I'm sorry. She continued to look forward into the dark as willpower trotted through the woods. You know, Teach, I wonder if we could start writing down in a notebook how many different ways and expressions you can come up with to let me know that you don't want me, or that I'm not worthy of you. Slam. She snorted out a short grunt from the back of her throat and attempted to melt the ice wall between them by leaning her head back onto his chest. Nick pulled back on the bit in her mouth to let her know that her tongue has done more damage those couple of days than good. PC, you know I don't mean it like that. I'm sorry, my tongue starts flapping and before I know it, it's one of those Yankee say something stupid things, she said. Please forgive me. Try to understand, it's not you that I don't want, it's that you don't trust me, he said interrupting her. No, because I don't trust life. I don't trust happiness, remember? It's not even a matter of trusting God anymore. I know God more than I did before, and I understand more than I did before, thanks to you. But I know life, and I'm tired of falling into the black hole of disappointment. I can't fall that far, again. I won't be able to get up, next time. You know, despair has no glass bottom. That's why it's so safe. That was a profound statement, and it described Katie to a T. Living in protection mode was living in despair so her glass bottom wouldn't crack or shatter, again. Nick remembered that date night and that realization that it wasn't so much men she did not trust, it was being happy, was always temporary. She was always preparing herself for the bottom falling out, expecting it. Why does there have to be a next time? He asked into her ear. She mumbled her answer straight up as she knew it. There's always a next time, PC, there's always been a next time for me. Okay, so yeah, bad things happen, and that's why God created marriage, so a man and a woman can go through life, good and bad, and rejoice together as well as hold each other up during the tough times. Well, sir, I don't know such a thing. The whole time we were married, I held up Michael and he got too heavy. My father never tried to hold up my mother and look how that turned out. My grandpa got sick early, and my nana had to take care of him for decades. I saw so many broken families as a kindergarten teacher, and now with the stupid book tour, that's all I hear is people's tragedies. Sorry, but that's all I see. No, that's all you focus on, he said. Nick let out a long, frustrated sigh. How could he compete with a train of thought that was so ingrained in her head that she was incapable of feeling any other way? She was going to keep that protective force field up. It was all she knew. Teach, remember when you said that you didn't come back to me, because you were afraid that you didn't fit into my world, because you didn't feel beautiful enough? She nodded. Do you still feel that way? She nodded. Are you serious? With how much the world loves Katie Lynn Moore, with all the things said about you, you still feel that way? It's not just that, it's life. I'm trying to get you to see that. Things come up that we don't anticipate, and they hit us from behind, like that beautiful young starlet in the future that you get a role or a duet with, and bam, before you know it, you're attracted to her, and you can't help it. Something just pulls you towards her. Then you look back, and remember how you felt about me, but that jolt thing had tarnished a bit. That jolt thing is newer and more exciting with the new beautiful thing singing your tune right beside you. The chemistry is there, and sparks are flying, and you're trapped between how you feel and what you promised. I just don't want to put you in that promise trap, just in case. Nick sighed. Teach, I would give it all up in a heartbeat if it would make you feel more secure. I know that, and that is why I am not going to let you. I talked to your gran, you know. She told me how guilty she has felt over the years, and I know that guilt. Sweetness, Gramps wanted Gran more than his music. He has never regretted one moment. So, he's told her, but let me tell you, there's still a part of your Gran that regrets that and refuses to believe him. Nick rested his head on Katie's shoulder. She put her hand up to his face behind her, noting his disappointment and how imprisoned she was by her own warped views of life as she knew it. Her heart was cuffed in a codependent relationship with Scotty, fearing she would never survive apart from him. The key to being freed from that jail cell was in her renewing love that was growing in her heart again for her Nicholas Paul, but the fear of the open world outside her prison kept her from letting him unlock the door. They rode willpower the rest of the way in silence. Only time could solve this problem, time and giving up his public life, which she refused to allow. She would never go through that again, and he knew it. When they reached the end of the woods, just as Nick had described, the view was incredible. The rolling hills and the far-off fields seemed to be illuminated as if they were made of some kind of glow-in-the-dark material. It gave the grass a fluorescent neon glow that was simply amazing to see. Nick gave willpower a gentle kick and he led them over to the banks of Penitence Pond. The rippling diamonds on the water's surface danced in the moonbeams, creating a magnificent dark prism. Katie was taken aback by the sight. She moaned at the beauty. "Told ya," he said. Nick dismounted first. He paused to see if Katie wanted help, and she nodded. He put his hands up and took hold of her slightly thicker waist, and gently carried her down, taking in the jolt, and giving her a pleasant shiver. They stood still for a moment. The romantic light of the blue moon glowed on each other's face, causing them to gaze into each other's soul. They both wanted Nick to kiss her. He swallowed hard and thought deeply. "Walk away, buddy, as much as you want it, show her you don't take without permission." He gave a sighing sad smile, let go of her waist, and walked away to move closer to the bank. She was slightly disappointed that he did not kiss her, for as much as she wanted him to, but in a way, she was relieved that he did not, also. She edged in closer from behind. He had his head down, and she was afraid to broach the subject, again, for fear of hurting him even more. He studied the crystal diamond-dotted shaped ripples in the pond, reflecting the silver-white light of the moon. "I'm so sorry, Nicholas Paul. I know you're hurting, and it's my fault. I keep hurting you. You know how I feel, Teach, and I understand how you feel. I understand your fear and your love for your Scotty. It's not all your fault or doing. I kinda like the guy myself, a bit too much. Believe it or not, I don't want to see him hurting any more than you do. Wow, what a heart you have, Nicholas Paul. I've learned from the best." He looked back at her, letting her know how much she was teaching him about caring about others' hearts over his. "Just like I predicted, you remember?" He shook his head. "I told you, that one day, you'd be presented with an opportunity when something you wanted would bring heartache to someone else, and you'd want to give up your desires in order to not hurt that other person." She was right. That was exactly how he felt. She predicted not only his fall, but his rise back up to moral fortitude, and his unselfish sacrificial caring for another person's heart, even more than his own. She put her hand on his back. "I'm so proud of you, PC, more proud every minute I spend with you. I see the pain in your eyes, how conflicted you are." He nodded. "Matthew." "What?" "You said Matthew always said that you just never know when God is going to throw us a curveball and all of this will work out, someday." He turned and looked at her. "A memory like an elephant," she said, leaning into his arm. "But a brain like she stopped him. "Like a genius artist, and smart enough to have a teachable spirit. That is an amazing quality, and so few have that, PC." He pulled his arm out from her grasp and put it around her shoulders. "Thanks, Teach." He let go and walked over to Willpower's saddlebags and put the blanket down in nearly the same spot he did earlier. They sat on the blanket, and she leaned her body up against his, resting her head on his bicep. They both stared out into the water, getting hypnotized in the moonbeam's reflection from the sky down to the pond. "You know, Teach, you say you're proud of me. Well, I was so proud of you with Kathy today. You were absolutely brilliant. I was the most proudest person in that room today, because I was the one who brought you to my grands. I kept thinking, God, how come I've been blessed this much to have her as a friend? Everybody in the world wants to be Katie Lynn Moore's friend, and here she sits, in my grand's living room with my family, and now right here with me. Now, how did I get that lucky?" She shook her head in disbelief. "Oh, brother, that's a stretch. It's the truth, and you know it. How many people would love to be your friend? Everybody adores you, America's sweetheart. That's how stupid the whole world is. They're all crazy, all of this is crazy, and I just wish it would go away because one of these days, they are all going to see the real me and be disappointed. They see the real you. There's no image factor here with you teach. Remember, you're a Yankee Belle, you're not putting on airs, he said with a slight chuckle. Well, certainly not the whole world. Remember, there's still a We Hate Katie Lynn Moore page out there. Now, imagine if all your groupies knew I was your girl, if I was, I mean. You mean if they found out you were my Princess Cindy? He asked. Yeah, that's what I mean. Imagine how every starry-eyed groupie who kept hoping and dreaming of being discovered by you as the one who was your destiny found out that I was Princess Cindy in the liner notes. I can just hear the rumble now. The likes on the We Hate Katie Lynn Moore page will rise exponentially. She looked back at him and tilted her head, raising one eyebrow. Are you hinting at something, Teach? Katie whipped half her body in his direction to look at Nick. Her eyebrows squeezed together, squinting one eye and tilting her head. The look on his face screamed of guilt. She read his eyes, and it was time for the bluffing trick, again. Well, I'm sure that you didn't mind that little bandit of Katie Lynn Moore bashers, back then. Geez, there were a bunch. I learned quick, go after a superstar and his groupies, become like hyenas going for the jugular. He chose to just drop his head and not say anything. This confused Katie because she did not know how much he participated, or if he just enjoyed it. Well, it doesn't matter, anyway, all that's said and done and in the bottom of that pond, so forget about it, PC. He raised his head with a grateful but guilty smile. She passed back her smile of grace, drowning his guilt. She put her palm on his shadow beard to wipe away what remaining guilt there was in his eyes. Now, I said forget about it, okay? I did my share of mudslinging. Remember? We were both stupid, and now we're both brilliant, having found each other and ourselves, again. He wanted to put his arm around her, but feared any contact. She was so touchy about when it was welcomed or when it was perceived as him moving in on her. She rested her head on his bicep. He tilted his head and rested it on top of hers. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? A malnourished, olive-toned, Yankee Belle kindergarten teacher and funny firecracker with a temper? He laughed. Nope, I see the most beautiful woman in the world, full of grace, with a heart as big as the universe. She shook her head and coughed out a disbelieving chuckle. She pulled her knees up to hug them and she rested her chin on her knees. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, she said, disqualifying his statement. What's that supposed to mean? Well, I'm your alleged jolt giver as you say, so for now, at least, your vision is obscured. One of these days, you'll get it back and see the real me and compare me to those beautiful models in your videos. You won't be whistling Dixie then. Why do you do that? What? Measure beauty by height, hair color, and dress size? Katie tucked her chin into her chest. Then she crooked her head toward Nick. What the heck are you talking about? Why do you think that the only qualification for a beautiful woman is that she must be a 6-foot blonde, thin as a rail, and with more makeup on than you probably use in a month? Why is it only they are beautiful? She turned back around and faced the pond. You mean like the twit? What's her name, Brooke, aka the whack job, and owner of that Facebook page? Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Why do you think only women who look like that are beautiful? Katie turned her head back to look at Nick. Do you think she's beautiful? I asked you a question first. She turned back to facing the pond. She hopped on her righteous horse, and she ran her mouth off, letting him have it with both barrels, not him in particular, but celebrity artists in general. Her rejected little child that still lived deep inside her subconscious came out in full force, as if it laid dormant for years just waiting for an opportunity to let one of them have it. Nick could tell by the tone of her voice, she was the disgruntled plain Jane speaking on behalf of all of them, being their voice, as she saw herself in that category. Because that's all you superstar hunks ever want in your videos, on the end of your arm, surrounding you with their tight, ripped t-shirts with those boobs pointing up at you, calling to you, for crying out loud. If not in your videos, then sprawled out in your spread in the magazine as your trophy wife with your two beautiful bleach blonde kiddos. You wanted to know, well, that's the truth. We plain Janes have to watch your videos with your blonde bombshells shaking their booty on the back of your trucks with their jeans painted on, or done up like China dolls, hanging all over you in your videos at a pub. Let me ask you something, Mr. Video Superstar, tell me, how many pubs do you walk into where there's nothing but beautiful Barbies wall to wall? 'Cause any pub I've walked into has all kinds of people, in different shapes and sizes. Barbies are sprinkled in, not filling the entire pub. There was a root of anger that came up with that accusation. So, we have to see that all the time, and feel so completely insignificant, like we plain Janes don't matter or have a prayer's chance in hell at attracting a superstar. Geez, all those poor groupies that aren't the beautiful Barbie models. I feel sorry for them. And that, Mr. Superstar, is why I do not like celebrities, in particular, you superstar hunks. Indignation forced her up and whisked her to the banks of Penitence Pond. Ah, damn, now I have to find another stone, she said, hitting herself in the head. He walked up behind her and stood there studying her. He could see the repentance in her stance. Teach. I'm sorry, I guess I got carried away. I'm sorry, Nicholas Paul. I didn't mean to flap my gums again. It's just that's how I see it. It's you beautiful people against us regular people, and we lose, all the time. So that's it? Yeah, that's it, I'm sorry. He slid up beside her. He took her by the shoulders and forced her to face him. She dropped her head, but he lifted her chin to make her look him in the eyes. So, because you keep insisting that you're a plain Jane, even though you aren't, you think that you don't fit into my world because you think I'm in a different world of just beautiful people and we discriminate against you and your kind, as you see it? Oh, I don't think your people are against us, it's just that we're not good enough for your world. Okay, so let's run with that. How do you explain the fact that I'm over here, trying like hell to get this wonderful plain Jane, as you see it, into my world? Because I lucked out and wrote a viral book. Oh, really? Yes, that's what they're going to say? They? Yeah, my kind. Oh, brother, you're ridiculous, you know that? I am? Yes, you are, because, my beautiful teacher, if you remember correctly, I believe it was 2 years ago, long before you typed one word of that viral book, that I bent over backwards to try to get you to spend some time with me in a restaurant booth, because you waltzed into my meet and greet line, not by choice, but you did anyway, and you knocked me on my ass. Now, how do you explain that? She paused. Well, they don't know that. They? Yeah, the regular people, and besides, you're different from them. Oh, I'm different now, but just a minute ago, it was my world, and I was one of those super hunks you categorized and called shallow and superficial and said you didn't like. I did not call you shallow and superficial. You most certainly did. That was what came out of your mouth. So, we celebrities are shallow and superficial, and you regular people are deep, people of substance, with real moral values. Unfortunately, you got tossed into this world of celebrity, and you hate it. You want back into your world because your kind is better than my kind. That is what you're saying. That is what you've been saying since the moment I met you, 2 years ago. Katie dropped right there on the grass, and pulled her knees in and hugged them. He was right. She was on her plain Jane high horse, and was knocked off it, and wanted back on, but because of her notoriety, she couldn't find her way back. Scotty was her way back, but Scotty wasn't her destiny. He stood over her, then squatted. He put his hand on her shoulder. Sweetness, beauty comes in all kinds of packages and sizes. There's the 6-foot blondes, the 5.5-foot brunettes, and my favorite, the petite, little, olive-toned Italian firecracker kindergarten teachers, who are funny as all hell, when she's not trying to push people away, because she's afraid to love them or feel loved by them. Katie lowered her head on her knees and started to weep quietly. "Can I hold you, princess?" She nodded. He sat down beside her and took her into his arms and squeezed her into his heart. "Sweetness, you have to stop categorizing people and just look at them, one heart and one soul at a time. Don't use their status, background, or career choice to stereotype them. It's not us against you. We're all equal in the eyes of God. That's where it really matters." "Nicholas Paul, how did you get to be so smart, and how is it, you know me so well?" "Shoot, PC, you know me better than I know myself? You're the artist teaching the teacher all the time, and I'm just so stupid." "You're not stupid, you're just reacting to all that you know, because of all that you've been through. You're seeing the world through the eyes of an injured little girl, then a broken-hearted widow." Katie began to cry deep sobs. He picked her up by the shoulders and led her back over to the blanket. He then put her on his lap and held her into his warmth and love the same way he did 2 years ago on that cold sidewalk. She tucked her head under his chin. "I remember this, PC, when you forced me into your love and warmth for my own good, because I was being an idiot." He held her in tighter and breathed his love on the back of her neck. "You weren't being an idiot, you were in self-punishment mode. You're always in self-punishment mode, blaming yourself when you ought not to do that. Not everything is your fault, like your parents' marriage falling apart, and your mother's suicide. You didn't kill your mother, she killed herself. You didn't kill Michael by threatening him, he chose to do those drugs, knowing it could kill him. You aren't to blame for his death like Lori tried to make you believe, and you didn't force her into that car with that bum that killed her. None of their deaths were your fault." Bam! He hit the nail on the head and finally made her see where her warped thinking stemmed. The foundation of all her insecurities went all the way back to when she was a child, and it still haunted her, even though she knew it wasn't the truth then. With all the tragedies, she connected them to the very first one she experienced. The lie that it was her fault somehow just stuck with her like flies on fly paper, and she could not make the feeling go away. She wept out all that guilt. It was time to let those tears fall from her face and her heart and fall permanently to the ground and never reappear. She sniffed in the moist night air of hope and love and wiped the tears from her face for good. She raised her head and looked at Nick with even more admiration. "Well, looks like I have a demon of my own that doesn't want to leave me, huh? Like my Michael who had a demon of self-loathing, and I have the one of blame and insecurity." He nodded. My, Nicholas Paul, I never give you credit for how really smart and brilliant you are." "Nope, I'm really stupid, Teach. I am that tortoise brain you keep calling me. It's a title I deserve." She shook her head. "No, you are not, and I'm so sorry, PC. You don't deserve that. Look at all you figured out about me, and have taught me about myself." "Teach, do you think I figured this out by myself? Really, Teach, don't you know me better?" She looked up at him with her eyebrows knitted. "Other people have told me all this about you. They've told me this after they found out some stupid things I've said and done, like letting you take the blame this afternoon." "Sean?" "Yeah, he's just one of them. I told you he was the brains of Nick Thomas." She laughed and shook her head. "I just made some observations myself, but nothing, PC, you're the brains of Katie Lynn Moore, because you have the smarts to put it out there for me, and hold up the mirror of my soul, because I'm too stupid to see it myself." "Teach, you're not stupid, you're just too hard on yourself. You expect too much for, and from yourself. Stop cutting yourself down. I told you, it's easier to see these things when you're out of the picture than when you're in the mirror. So many times you've held up a mirror for me, and shown me how selfish and self-absorbed, and center-staged I am. So, we're good for each other." She nodded. "I guess you're right, PC. Princess, you have to stop trying to block out people's love for you and accept it. It's okay to receive love, sweetness, and enjoy it. That's what God is all about, love, giving and receiving." Matthew keeps saying the same thing. Well, he's right. She tucked her head back under his chin and put her ear right next to his heart. I guess he's not the only one who's so wise. She put her hand over his heart and tapped his chest. Thank goodness you're not a prude like he is. She giggled and tucked her head back under his chin. Nick could tell that she was starting to feel safer with him, and he was going to take this one life-learning lesson at a time. Maybe I know a little about life, sweetness, but you know a lot more about love, so we'll teach each other, huh? She nodded. Do you really think I'm beautiful, as in the kind others might see too, not just a mentally imbalanced off-his-meds country hunk who's had sunspots permanently implanted in his eyes? Nick laughed. Sweetness, just like every horse is beautiful as far as us horse lovers can see, it's what's in here, he pointed to her heart. That is what makes a horse a thoroughbred. My beautiful Princess Cindy, you are a thoroughbred, and I'm the goat. Katie laughed, remembering that wonderful moment when he admitted his want and desire for her as a potential Mrs. Thomas. Wow, just thinking back to that time, I remember wondering what spaceship did you fall from, or if you had hit your head somewhere. I never dreamed, imagined, or even fathomed back then that I could, or would be a candidate for a Mrs. Nick Thomas. She pulled in her lips, and covered her mouth with her hand, admitting that was their likely future. He fought what he wanted to say, but just let that comment sit there, knowing she regretted it out of fear. No pressure, she mumbled, then giggled. His body shook with laughter at her catching herself. She popped out of his lap and stood with her hands on her hips, looking down at him. So, now, answer the question, she said. What question? Do you think the twit is gorgeous? He stood and held her firmly by the shoulders. I think that since I'm not her man, I'll leave that answer up to her future guy, because that's all it matters to. She nodded and reclaimed the spot on the blanket reserved for only her. Good comeback. But, admit it, you do, you just don't want to say it in front of me, because you think I'd get jealous. Michael had his Kimmy, and she was like the twit, only trashier. She wasn't delusional, she was evil. I think evil women and delusional ones I don't have to worry about with you. Nick shook his head, feeling such pity for Brooke. He sat down with such seriousness and a burden on his face as he stared out into the pond. Teach? What? She turned her head to look at him. Her name is Brooke, and I gotta ask you to stop calling her the twit, or the whack job and referring to her as delusional, or any other derogative manner. Katie jerked her body straight up. And sat up on her knees. She's got something on you, and she's blackmailing you, Katie said with her hands clasped tight squeezed in between her thighs. He shook his head. There was a look of sadness that came over Nick's face. Uh-oh, she's knocked up, and you're her baby daddy, she said with suspicion. Nick shook his head. Ah, come on, Sean says she's got something on you. You already admitted to your little indiscretion, we've settled all that, so what's the deal? Compassion tightened his lips. She thought she saw a look of guilt on his face. Oh, wow, I think I know, she said with facetiousness. What do you know? You didn't just do the twit, you did her mother too. Nick's body jerked back. He got up on his feet and looked down on her with his fist clenched. You think I'd really do that? Shit, Teach, you think I'm that low? Katie stood up and put her hand on his chest to calm him down. Hold up there, Father Murphy, I was just kidding. Can't you tell when an obnoxious dry, witty Yankee belle is joking? His chest dropped, but the guilt remained high from the truth of his liaison with Brooke and Jenna. After that righteous stance, he couldn't go and admit that to her now. Now, sit back down. She guided him back down and climbed back up on his lap. She put her arms around his neck. Now, tell the teacher, what's the matter and why do you have such a look of guilt on your face? Well, Teach, after spending one day at her parents' home, seeing the luxury prison that she's imposed upon herself, I pity her enough to be a friend to her. Katie lowered her chin, curious. Now, don't go thinking anything into that, but just friendship. Oh, like you and me are just friends. No, sweetness, nothing like that, not even close. It's more of a sympathetic friendship, She has a real asshole for a father, if you'll pardon the expression, and she's trapped there, she thinks. When I made my apology tour, I apologized to everyone that I did wrong, and she was one of them. How did you do her wrong? Brooke has had this thing for me since Talking a Spin with You first hit the airways, back about 5 years ago. She was instrumental in getting requests to radio stations with her contacts and her social media sites. I sometimes think I never would have had that first #1 if it weren't for her. I am obligated to show some sort of appreciation, and she has this crazy notion that she is going to be Mrs. Nick Thomas, eventually. Then when I started drinking and she started the smear campaign, I fed into her delusions by allowing her to manipulate me with her hatred for you. I was stupid, and I sort of led her on, and that was unfair of me. Oh, so she is your Kimmy. Nick got angry with that remark and Katie saw his empathetic expression turn to anger. Oops, JKPC, JK. Stop comparing me to Michael, I'm nothing like him. The only thing we have in common is the shiver, and that's it, he said with frustration. Katie swallowed hard, regretting lowering Nick's values down to Michael's. That is if I even have the shiver, anymore, you're doing your damnedest to fight it off. Katie got down off his lap, and back on her knees. Well, darling, you certainly haven't lost your touch. I've just gotten better at hiding it, or subduing it, by reasoning it away. She looked up at him with those guilty eyes, both of them knowing the truth behind that statement. He smiled, warmed by that acknowledgement. She turned to look at him. I'm sorry, I'll never mention, nor compare in my head anything about you and him. You are miles above him in honor and character. Thanks, Teach. Now, my prince of passion, tell me why you feel so bad about Brooke. I do owe Brooke a certain amount of respect. She played a huge role in my career, and still does. However, she's escaping her reality by letting herself indulge in the delusion that she could possibly become the next Mrs. Nick Thomas, even though that title is being reserved for someone else. Oh, really? Who? Katie gave him a cheeky grin. He looked at her and tilted his head, shaking it. No, really, come on, fess up, who is it? I just can't imagine. She put her hand to her chin as if thinking. He looked at her and raised his eyebrows. Katie's face opened up wide, her mouth popped open, and her eyes almost as wide as her mouth. She jumped up and put her hand on her heart. Oh my gosh, she exclaimed in a high-pitched tone, as if she were a teeny bopper groupie. She started spinning around and jumping up and down. Oh my gosh, you mean me? Really, oh my gosh, Nick Thomas wants me, oh my gosh, me. Who could have ever imagined that? Oh, my gosh, Nick Thomas, I'm going to be the next Mrs. Nick Thomas, she hollered, putting on a show. He stood, grabbed her shoulders, and firmly settled her. Knock it off, Teach, it's not funny. Stop messing around like that. He had such a serious look on his face and showed her his displeasure with her groupie-like behavior. He hated the image that the girls worshipped. He had shared that with her 2 years ago. She stopped and looked up into his empathetic eyes. She could see that he truly felt sorry for Brooke. When she had stopped and was calm, he sat back down and looked out toward the pond. She sat back down on his lap and put her hands around his neck. Okay, my darling prince. I'm sorry. Now, tell the teacher what is really bothering you about her. What is it this teacher can do to help you, or her? Look, I have to find a way to balance my sympathy for her, and my appreciation without giving her any false ideas. I feel really bad for her. She needs a friend, a balanced one, if you know what I mean. Right now, all she has is other Nick Thomas groupies. She needs a balanced friend, one who has the right perspective on things, particularly on me. Oh, I get it. She needs someone who can tell her, and get her to believe that you actually have a few hidden character flaws? She chuckled. You know what I mean. She needs a friend who knows me well, who looks at me with the right perspective, and could straighten her out, only, I think I'm the wrong person for that. You see, all her other friends are feeding into her delusion. They're almost as unbalanced as she is, believing her as my future missus. Oh, I think I know where this is going. He pulled her out and looked her in the eye, giving Katie her assignment. She needs a Katie Lynn Moore, who can talk some sense into her, when or if she can ever get her to stop hating Ms. Moore, right? Nick smiled and nodded. He had the begging look, seeking Katie's magic powers of compassion and empathy. Please, Teach, would you mind? Do you think that you could forgive her enough to help her gain a clue on reality, and maybe become strong enough to get out on her own, releasing herself from her prison of trying to please an impossible man? Are you referring to you or her father? She tilted her head, and he crooked his. Both, I guess. Katie snorted a laugh. She shook her head, giving him a nod and a smile of approval. Look, Teach, I've already started working on that. I've already started telling her how wrong I was about you, but of course, with the rumors, she's accusing me of having a thing for you. Really, imagine that. Now, who would believe that silly rumor? She said, joking. I said, stop that, Katie. I'm being serious. I need to find a way to hide it, and it's kind of hard, you know. He called her Katie, and she shook her head. No pun intended, right? She started cracking up and at that point, putting her hand over her mouth and dropping her eyes toward his manhood for a second. Lighten up, Bruce Wayne, stop being so serious about this. I'm just playing with ya. Nick dropped his serious mood and let it out, laughing with her. Oh, my funny teacher. Look. He held up her hand with the ring on her finger. Regardless of what this means to you, it's going to mean the world to Brooke. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, you're saying that if I can't talk Scotty into marrying me, or myself into believing that he would, I can definitely talk Brooke into thinking that I'm the future Mrs. Scotty P. Wells, Katie said, finally admitting her life of living in denial. Nick put his hands on her shoulders. That's exactly what I'm saying. See, Teach, you're pretty smart yourself, and the way you love on people, if anyone can win over Brooke, darling, you can. You win everyone over. He kissed her on the forehead, showing his admiration for her. Okay, my compassionate country co-conspirator, Operation Deprogram Brooke is a go. We'll come up with some kind of plan where I can worm my way into her world, and become her buddy, then drop the bomb that she has a snowball's, no, a blizzard's chance in hell of ever being Mrs. Nick Thomas. How's that? Nick chuckled in appreciation of her plan and her heart. Maybe a little less blunt than that, but yeah. Okay, I think I can find a way to put a plan together, that is as long as she is not knocked up, I mean. Nick dropped his chin and knitted his brows at the thought. His eyes traveled to and fro, worried and wondering. I think if she was, I'd already know about it, Teach. I think I just may have dodged a bullet on that one. Katie snorted a laugh, then got serious. So, you really did do it with her? He closed his eyes and squeezed them shut, dropping his head. He feared another reaction like the one in the cottage. His face tightened and his jaw clenched. She reached up and put her palm on his face to soften his tension. Sweetie, I'm kidding. I think I knew, but I wasn't sure. I imagine you had to have been totally trashed, blacked out even. Teach, I was. I don't remember any of it. Then how do you know if you did? Well, it's kinda weird, but when I was unconscious on the sidewalk, or in the hospital, whichever, I think I had a dream about it, like I was watching a movie of it. So, then maybe it didn't happen? Nick shook his head. Nah, it must have. She insists, and I have this vague foggy memory now, as if it were a dream, but of a different person. That's because you are a different person. You're Nicholas Paul, again, and he'd never have done that, but the drunken Nick Thomas, who that brick wall obliterated, could have, right? He nodded. Okay, so, Nicholas Paul, you've repented, you've apologized, now, let's move on, and find a way to straighten that poor girl out, the way Jesus would approve, okay? He hugged her, without permission, but with gratefulness. That's my girl, my little planner, who comes up with the greatest of productions to manipulate people. PC, that didn't sound very good. She put her hands on her hip. Well, it's true. I mean, look at your best scheme so far. You mean Operation Rescue Fair Maiden from Stalker? No, I was referring to the one that got me. She tilted her head. You know, the operation let's fool the artist into thinking you hated celebrities when in fact you were really a lovesick groupie plan that got me swooning you. Katie backed up, putting her hands on her hips and locking her shoulders. Oh, my gosh, I can't believe you just broke rule number 1 again. What the hell is wrong with you, Nikki? You trying to get me to hate celebrities, again, after you just spent all that effort trying to get me to open up my closed mind? She crossed her 2 index fingers. Shame on you, buddy. You are going to pay for that little mistake. He started laughing. Geez, man, don't you know when an artist is joking using his Southern country humor? She laughed. You know, I think there might be a language barrier between us. Southern humor doesn't translate well into Yankee humor. They both laughed and hugged a friendly chuckling hug. She took him by the hand, and they sat back down with her facing him on her knees. Okay, now if I'm going to put this plan into effect, I'm going to need some background information. Why is she in a luxury prison and why has she incarcerated herself? What's her family like? Nick, appreciating Katie's willingness to help, began to fill Katie in on what he observed in Brooke's mixed up and sad world. Oh, that poor girl, staying there just for her mom, and feeling some kind of loyalty to a jerk father. Geez, I surely never felt that kind of loyalty. But obviously, her parents aren't monsters. Just bad parents, like the majority of us. So, is she really in love with you, or is it infatuation gone awry? He put his hand behind his neck and rubbed out the guilt. I think she thinks she's really in love, but she doesn't really know Nicholas Paul, she only knows Nick Thomas the country artist, so, it's probably infatuation gone awry. Katie shook her head in empathy. She put herself in Brooke's shoes and she turned the tables. Wow, the poor kid. I feel sorry for her, because if she did get to know Nicholas Paul Thomas, she'd really fall crazy in love like she stopped, okay, like I did. There, I said it. Now, it's out there, no pressure, though. Nick laughed, knowing their time just wasn't yet, but someday would be. No pressure, friend. So, this is going to be a challenge. Do you think we have enough time to reverse her thinking before Jesus comes back for us? Nick laughed. No, really, is she a believer? Nick shrugged his shoulders. I know her mother is deeply devoted and loves God, and I imagine she's taking Brooke to church with her, but based on her behavior at the pubs when she's tailgating my bus, I'm going to say, she dumps the Christianity when I'm on tour within 500 miles of her home state. Oh, boy, I've got my work cut out for me, but, with God, all things are possible. Okay, I'll get on it right away, and see what I can come up with. You soften the blow, try to get her to stop hating me, and I'll work a little of Cindy's magic, she said with her disbelieving cackle. That's my magical princess. If anyone can do it, you can. So, what does she have on you? Katie asked with facetiousness and a giggle. JK, right, my princess? She nodded, then shook her head, assuming it was something, but neither wanted to discuss it then, and they continued to both live in denial over that. Chapter 14. A big brawny scaredy cat. Nick stayed at Grand's that night, having to take Katie into town in the morning. He had administrative and planning events that he needed to take care of with his agent and publicity team. His morning was completely taken up by his own things, so